Welcome to our first as a gardening and farm fest. It used to be gardening and DIY. We used to have a separate CSA fair, but we're really happy to have combined these two events. And I'm extremely excited that we have Shawn Severance here, one of the naturalists at Washtenaw County Parks, who knows so much about spring bees and gardening for pollinators. And so please give her a warm welcome.
Well, hi everybody. Like Erin said, my name is Shawn, and most of the time I'm teaching outdoors because I lead nature hikes for Washtenaw County Parks. And in my work, you know, me as a teacher, I'm spending a tremendous amount of time outside, right? And a lot of it is by myself because I'm thinking, okay, I have this content that I want to impart in a nature hike. But you have to marry your content to the land, right? Okay, here I'm going to talk about this when I'm looking at this tree, and then here I'm going to focus on this, and so it's like a educational, but on a route. So in this time prepping these nature hikes, it's amazing, quietly walking through the land by myself and thinking and looking carefully how much diversity is all around us all the time, and if we have even one other person with us talking, you miss it. So I have the gift, really the privilege of being outdoors quietly by myself every single week, multiple times. And so from that place of curiosity and observation, I'm going to talk to you about the things that I've learned over the years about wild bees and wild native bees in particular, and the important role they play in our food security and in just honestly our beauty and a delight in the wild world around us, and how close they are to us at all times, and how gentle they are, and how intelligent they are. So I called it Gardening for Pollinators because I really feel, you know, what speaks to me so deeply is the wild. And it's always in me, this calling, this longing to find the wild things. And what I've come to is people are at the heart of restoring the land. And it's people's loving for the wild and caring for the wild and finding it of value. So to me, gardening is at the heart of restoration work. Gardening is it's finding that intermingling of human needs and the needs of nature and finding that they are in fact the same. So that's why I'm talking about gardening for pollinators, not just here's bees and why they're cool. So I hope to give you some good tips. It would help me out a lot if anybody would be willing to share something that you're curious about learning in the next 45 minutes, or you know, if you have a particular question, because, you know, I could go on and on, but I want to make sure that this is relevant to you. No pressure. I'm quite shy, so I don't ever like this question myself. But
okay, this is more of a sillier, just a briefly asked kind of question. But I have my family has a history of bee allergies, so I kind of avoid bees, like trying to be in the vicinity of bees or wasps or anything at all costs.
Okay.
But I want to bring them in.
Yeah.
My garden and help save the bees. So with bumblebees, are they more? They kind of tend to wander around. They make me nervous because I'm like, where are you going, buddy? So do they tend to sting, or is it only if you bother them, or how concerned should I be?
Okay. I've got that question, and we'll get to that when we talk about bumblebees, if that's okay with you. But I think generally a lot of people are worried about bees' safety.
Yeah.
Being safe. Nobody wants to be stung. If you're allergic or not allergic, it hurts. Any other particular things? So bee safety.
I am wondering about the balance of leaving old dead like stalks for pollinators to lay eggs in.
Yeah.
Versus like when to clear away dead stuff to help your plants grow.
I have heard that question a number of times. So like how they say, you know, leave the leaves and save the stems, right? So what does that really mean to save the stems, and how do you help? Do you save every stem, or how long do you save them for? So there's always, okay, that's a really good one. So bee safety, save the stems. What does that really mean?
How can we destigmatize bees and pollinators and shift the conversation away from just being about the honeybee
Mhm.
which can't pollinate a lot of plants in North America.
Yeah.
To saving our native bees, because I've noticed that a lot of bee conservation concern in the public perception, not necessarily people who like insects, is focused solely on the honeybee, and a lot of our crops depend on these native bees.
So beyond the honeybee,
Yeah.
bee conservation, how do we keep bee conservation inclusive and understand bee diversity benefits us, right? How do we get that out there as something? No, that's great. I'm with you. I'm passionate about bees. Go ahead.
I just say what plants to encourage more of.
Plants.
Local bees and, yeah.
I mean, that's where it starts, right? Is what plants we put out there. So that's a really important question. Go ahead.
If you have a backyard that's kind of rough,
Mm-hmm.
and you can make, how do you encourage a bee habitat, you know, like, sticks and everything piled up, or?
What does that bee habitat really look like? Because
Use
yeah.
water out there, put a little.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Because animals are looking for really specific things, I guarantee you. So what are those things? How long do you leave the stems? What else do they need? Yeah, they are looking for really specific things.
And if there's,
Always. Go ahead.
if there's any words you have that I can impart to my condo about spraying lawns and if that affects bees,
Okay. Let's think about that.
because they're really spraying lawns.
There was a slide I debated about putting in. I might send you a link after for some really important data. I didn't put it in. One question in the back, and then I'll comment rather. And
I have 4 mason bee houses,
Okay.
and I hope
4.
we'll be talking about mason bees today.
I sure will. And I'll be talking about bee houses, but spoiler alert, you might not like what I have to say. Yeah. We'll get to it though, because I have had them. But you might have done it better than me. I didn't do it well. Go ahead.
I wanted to link to.
What?
I just wanted to link to about talking to like homeowners associations.
How do you talk to people? Yeah. How do you craft a message that is going to be welcomed and actually shift the dial? Yeah. Okay. Be received well and create positive action. Is there a way to encourage bees? Yeah. The short answer is yes. Because they have slightly overlapping needs, but also quite different needs. Yes, you could. Now, if I forget any of these, I want you to remind me, but I think like what I'm hearing is a lot of these things I am going to touch on, and if you want me to delve deeper, you're like, wait a second, I want to know more, please, my job is I'm an outdoor, informal, environmental educator. I actually started as a college science teacher, but in my journey, I've learned how to do more like interpretive kind of education where I'm working with the people and really doing as much listening as talking. So please, if I'm touching on something that sparks curiosity for you or one of your questions, because there were more than I thought and I should have written them down and I didn't. But so my memory is like, I have a working memory of honestly one thing at a time. So please stop me and do ask. I'm not just gonna save questions for the end because I'm really used to flowing like that in and out of my content. So are we okay? There might be a few more questions or comments, but can I start? And then as we go along, if there's something that feels particularly important for you to contribute, please do that. So what's on this little, yeah, pollen, and that's really where the story starts, is pollen. Does anybody know what pollen actually is, though, like in a science way? Raise your hand if you think you know what pollen is. Like, all right, yeah? So go ahead.
It's the male gamete that the flowers produce. It's sperm.
It's plant sperm. It's male reproductive DNA, and that male reproductive DNA has got to get to a plant ovary. Sometimes that ovary is in the same exact flower, and it doesn't have very far to go. Sometimes it's on a completely different plant. Sometimes there's male and female plants where the ovary is in one place and the male pollen production is on a totally different plant, and it's got to travel through the air. So there's 2 ways to travel for pollen. Do you know the 2? Wind. Yes, wind. For pollen is small and light. That is actually the original way, is wind pollination. So here you go. This is what wind pollination looks like. You see this cloud of yellow? It's sort of vaguely yellow, and all these conifers here, it's obviously not Michigan. This is pollen, and many plants do it this way. Gymnosperms or conifers are older in the fossil record than our flowering plants. Flowering plants and bees kind of emerged about the same time. But the wind-pollinated plants are older. They're the original way of plants spreading pollen around. It's just really light pollen to float on the wind. This is what causes allergies for us, is this wind-pollinated. If you see a flower in spring and it's hanging down like a tassel, that's usually wind-pollinated. And you have like your nut trees, a lot of your grasses are wind-pollinated, a lot of your conifers are wind-pollinated. Here's a bee, though. That's the other way, right? Is to hitch a ride. If your pollen is bigger and heavier and it can't float on the wind, it needs to hitch a ride on something that can move through the air, and that is almost always a bee. Bees are not the only thing that go to flowers for nectar. Wasps go to nectar. You will see yellow jackets nectaring at flowers. If you have flowers, you are providing a resource for bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, flower flies. All kinds of amazing insects will visit you. I think of wasps as our yellow stripy friends that we just need to treat with a great deal of respect. They need a lot of space from us. We can't be yelling and waving our hands around them because they also hunt. They don't eat meat as an adult, but their young often eat meat. So a wasp is designed to hunt, and they will be more aggressive than a bee in terms of a yellow jacket, not our native wasps necessarily. So these are the two ways that pollen moves around. Wind, light pollen, insect, heavy pollen. Mostly bees, because bees are at a flower not just for the nectar, but also, specifically, they have pollen-gathering structures on their bodies. Because bees feed their larvae, their young, they're completely vegetarian at every life stage. They feed their young a mixture of nectar and pollen mixed together in a little wet lump called bee bread. It's called bee bread because the wild yeast ferments it, and it smells beautiful, actually. And Mother Bee doesn't have a refrigerator, so she is using a fermented food for her young to grow on. So she is specifically collecting pollen because it is the protein source for her young larva to eat. And she mixes that with a carbohydrate, so they've got a complete food source. So bees are there specifically to get pollen, and that is why they're such good pollinators. They're designed to gather pollen on their bodies. Go ahead.
Do all bees, like across all species, make bee bread?
No, honeybees make honey. Bumblebees are a cousin of honeybees, and they also make honey. But let me just say, in North America, we have about 4,000 species of native wild bees and counting. And in Michigan, we have over 450 species of wild bees. And to my knowledge, none other, I could be wrong, because bees are a very, very diverse group, but I think nobody but a honeybee or a bumblebee makes honey. I think the rest of them make bee bread for their young. Bee bread. Would we agree? Any disagreement in the audience about people that might know more than me? I'm pretty sure this is by and large the vast majority of our bee pollinator friends do that. So can a butterfly pollinate? Yes, but they've got a very long tongue and very long legs, and their bodies are high up above the flowers, and they are not getting intimate with that flower. They're not getting their furry body into the flower, so they're really not picking up that much pollen. It's not that they can't. They're just nowhere near as good as a bee. So I put a bee there as the insect pollinator because they really are the best. Any questions about that so far? Good? All right. That is pollen. Pollen is actually really cool when you look at it close up. They have intricate folds and like an envelope, and it's waterproof. So it's really a living thing, right? It's a living thing with DNA in it, and its pollen coat is designed maybe like a little Velcro shape to actually stick to the bee. This is a mutual association between the pollen and the bee. The pollen wants to move to fertilize its neighboring plant, and the bee wants to eat it and feed it to its young. So the pollen, when it gets wet, this envelope dissolves. When it goes down into the ovary, the envelope dissolves and releases the male DNA and creates, this is, I think I've kind of already said this, right? But if you don't know what pollination exactly is, this is a honeybee, by the way. The bee goes to the flower, it gets the pollen grains on its body. Honeybees carry pollen packed in a wet lump on their hind leg. They have 6 legs, so the last pair. And then they go to the next flower, and of course they're going to drop a little bit of pollen on the second flower, and that's when the pollination happens. It's not when they go to the first flower, it's when they drop it on the second one. And then this pollen goes down through the ovary to the ovary through the pistil of the flower. And then we get what? What do we get? What's amazing? We get fruit, right? My dad was an amazing gardener. He worked so hard, but nowhere near what bees do. They're up at the crack of dawn out there just pollinating and making fruit for us. This is an insufficiently pollinated fruit, right? Maybe it was really cold and rainy when this particular flower was blossoming and the bees weren't flying. It was like 50 degrees and raining. Like strawberries are blooming right now, right? So if this flower was blooming yesterday, it wouldn't have gotten pollinated. But if they're sufficiently pollinated, they're beautiful big fruits. Have you ever grown a cucumber that's sort of like big and then it gets skinny at the end? Hey, it got pollinated in the beginning and it didn't get pollinated. And so the scrawny little end of the oddly shaped cucumber is lack of pollination for either not enough pollinators or the weather wasn't cooperating when the flower was available for pollination. So really the vast majority of what makes our diet interesting is because a pollinator visited a flower. This is a picnic without bees. Your kebabs wouldn't have peppers, tomatoes, and onions. The blackberry pie would just be the crust. The PB&J would just be the bread because wheat is wind pollinated. No lemonade, no watermelon, no guacamole, just the cheese there. So really, we need pollinators so much more than they need us. Right, and so to make space in our environments, in our habitats for pollinators and make it a safe and welcoming place for them, it really is so beneficial for people. So this is a honeybee, and you can see again it's got this wet lump on its back leg there. That's on a willow. If you want to do one thing to help all bees, plant willows. Willows are so important for early spring bees. Bumblebees and our wild early spring bees like Calites bees and mason bees and minor and andrena bees. Willows are typically the very first source of high-quality pollen for them to start to fuel up and start to build their nests. If you can add willows, all you have to do is take a willow cutting and poke it in the ground. They self-root. Yep, so if you're in somebody's yard and you find a willow that you think is particularly beautiful, you just take your pruner and go snip. You find a little wet corner of your yard and you go poke, and you are going to have a beautiful willow shrub within a year. Go ahead. I think there's a huge variety of native willows, and some would be more full sun, and some would be they're a stream-side plant in nature, so I bet a lot of them would tolerate partial shade. But you put it in and let it go. I think many willows are what we call dioecious, so there's male and female plants, so if you really want to provide the pollen, you need the male plant. And you can have the female plant too if you want willow's seeds, but for the bees, you want to make sure you get a male willow. So that's a honeybee. And just a word, if I didn't say, honeybees, did I say that honeybees are not native to the Americas? Did I? Native Americans had no idea what honey was. They didn't know. This, there's your queen, right? It's a caste system, a queen in many worker bees. She lives 6 years. She never leaves the nest. She lays eggs. The worker bees go out and forage. The worker bees care for the young. They care for her. And I think they lick her body and keep her clean. It's very sweet. So they really are They keep her warm all winter. They incubate her they're a tropical species, so they have to keep that queen about 80 degrees all winter long. We're a tropical species. We like it the same way, don't we? Like, sitting next to a wood stove on a cold, cold day. Well, the bees, they generate heat by shivering their bodies. They form a big ball, and the queen is at the center, and they shiver all winter long, and they incubate her. And the bee grouping rotates. So the outside bees go to the inside, and the inside bees go to the outside. Yeah. So they keep her warm all winter. They incubate her. That's if they get outside of the hive, they start to make these, out of the hive, the honeybee hive. They make these kind of long wax structures. Don't believe the other bees really make wax. I think honeybees do that. So honeybees really come from India, and they moved out of India, and I think maybe also Africa is where they're indigenous to, and they moved out of these countries in waves. This is a picture of quite an old rock painting in India, and it seems like people may have been harvesting honey from honeybees in their native range for maybe 40,000 years. So it's a really ancient relationship between people and honey, and this is not to discount honeybees. It's to think beyond the honeybee. What else can we do? Because you're right, people are very aware of honeybee conservation. I will say that one of the biggest ways that I understand from a beekeeper that I know that they're able to pay their bills is shipping beehives across the country to pollinate, like almond orchards, and trucking bees across the country for pollination services. So it's not just about honey, but it's a really important, industry for a lot of people. But this is how they got here. This is a reenactment of Jamestown. This guy is quite happy to be on land, and they came over in crocks on the ships from England because they didn't know what they would find here. Maybe the maple sugar is only produced in this part of the world, by the way, so they didn't know that they would have maple sugar. Who was doing the pollinating then for, hundreds of thousands of years before the honeybees got here 400 years ago? All these native bees, of which I did mention we have over 400. This is a small image to show you some of the incredible diversity. We've got large bees and green bees and super tiny bees and bees that look like a wasp. This might be a cuckoo bee. She doesn't collect her own pollen. She just sneaks into another lady's nest and lays her egg on the other lady's bee bread. These are all bees, and they look all kinds of different ways. If you see a little insect coming up out of the ground and somebody's like, oh my gosh, it's a wasp, it's actually at this time of year almost always a bee coming out of the ground. We've got our bumblebees, which are super important pollinators, but really beautiful diversity. And when you get into the world of bees and you slow down and start to take a look at them, you're amazed at their beauty and diversity, I think, every single time. But here's where they are typically. They do not make a hive. They do not make honey. They do not have a caste system where they have multiple related individuals cooperating to feed their young. They are, by and large, solitary, which is why native bees are actually very gentle and safe compared to a honeybee or a yellow jacket that's got a nest with a bunch of workers and a bunch of larvae that a skunk might want to come and eat or a bear might want to come and eat. Well, this lady, she is just doing her own thing. She goes, these are the bee breads. She goes and harvests her pollen and nectar. This is a hole in the ground, or maybe it's a hollow stump, but very often 70% of our native bees nest in the ground. So this might be a hole in the ground. She puts her bee bread in, she lays an egg on it, and then she walls off that chamber, and she goes and gets another bee bread and lays another egg and walls off that chamber. And little by little by little, maybe she lays 20 eggs. Her flight period might be about a month, and then she dies. That's it. Our wild bees fly in the adult stage for about a month, and then the other 11 months of the year, They are either underground or in a hollow plant stem as a larva. They are completely provisioned with this bee bread. There is no more parental care. There is no more parental feeding. This is all the nutrition that they need to grow into an adult flight-capable bee. But it takes them, they overwinter underground like this, either as a larva. If it's a summer flying bee, they overwinter as a larva because they don't have time to develop into an adult. But if it's a spring flying bee, they overwinter as a flight-capable adult so they can get out right away when it warms up. So this is where they are. Many of our, like who likes, I don't know, pumpkin curry? Who doesn't, right? All of our best pumpkin pollinators, which I'll show you in a minute, is a squash bee. They're all underground right now. They're all underground, usually near wherever you planted your squash last year. So you get cavity nesters that nest in hollow stems. That's what we build our mason bee houses for and buy our mason bee houses for. And I don't know if I said it specifically, that's about 30% of our native wild bees nest in cavities, and the remaining 70% are underground. Any questions about that? Is that a surprise to anybody, where they're all living? Yeah, it's often really surprising to think that it's true of butterflies too. These beautiful animals that we see, it's the minority of their life. A Luna moth doesn't even have feeding mouth parts. They only fly for a week to reproduce. The entire life cycle is a larval stage, or a pupa, eating the leaf, or in a state of pause, not really eating or growing or doing anything at all, just waiting for spring to come. It's really strange to think about. But insects are ancient, and they've been through a whole lot of change on Earth, and maybe being underground for 11/12 of your life is very protective when you need to go through a Permian extinction or something like that. That's what I think. It tends to be pretty safe under there. So here we're going to get into the actual bees that you're going to see, and I tried to do them in seasonal order. How are we doing on time? I can't even remember when I'm supposed to be done with this. 2:30. All right, I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to try to go for about 7 more minutes, 7 or 8, and then leave time for questions, if I can. This is a minor bee. You can see what's neat about this one. This is a spring beauty. This is a wild spring ephemeral that you'll see. Often it grows very well in lawns, but also oak hickory woodlands. Not all pollen is yellow. This one has pink pollen, and it's super cute. Look at that little pink pollen on that leg of that little bee. The minor bees are named for their behavior of digging holes in the ground for their nests. They're mining underground. They're one of our earliest spring pollinators. They dig a nest in well-drained, sandy soil. It's going to be an open, really low vegetation. You're going to see little spots of sand, often in mowed lawn. They are small and dark. They're dark so they can absorb the sun's rays to heat their bodies up so they can fly in cooler temperatures. They are often specialist pollinators. They specialize in, that means one kind of flower. And what that means is that's the only kind of pollen they can digest. That's the only kind of pollen they can get nutrition from. So if you don't have that flower, in this case, this bee specializes in spring beauty. And if you don't have spring beauty, you will not have this bee. Minor bees, one way to identify bees quickly is into families anyway. This is the family. Where do they put their pollen? Minor bees carry their pollen on their legs, like a honeybee, but not in a wet lump, kind of in a messy, loose lump, which makes them a better pollinator because they're not carrying their pollen so tightly. They release it into the second flower a little more readily. So who has spring beauty in their yard? No. Go into the forest. It's beautiful. And you can eat the leaves. They taste like green beans. There's the egg on the bee bread. And this is really what it looks like. Do you see her? Here's her nest. There's a low grassy area with some open sandy soil. She's kicking the dirt out. Her little bee hole will be perfectly round. It will look like somebody took a Ticonderoga pencil and poked it into the ground. That's how you know it's not an ant nest. It's a perfectly round hole about the size of her body, which is about the diameter of a pencil. So if you have a cloud of insects in your yard on a warm day, slow down, stand really still to be safe, But I promise you at this time of year, it's not a wasp. It's a bee. I mean, and I could be wrong because some nature is complicated, but I've never seen it. Here's a mason bee. Mason bees are also early spring flyers. They begin to fly at 50 to 55 degrees. 55-degree day, you're not going to think a honeybee will be out. It probably won't. But if you like strawberries and plums and apricots, which bloom really early in colder temperatures, it's really these early spring bees that you want. They are a cavity nester, so they're going to look for a hollow plant stem like that. And this is one of my favorite ways to conserve bees in the landscape is to just prune the raspberries. So you prune your raspberries in the fall, about half height. You leave these cut stems, and they go right into them, and they chew out the pith, and they make their nests in there. And then in the spring, you get to just sit and watch them emerge. It's really beautiful. Their home range, if you have them in your yard, is about 300 yards. They have a really small home range. A honeybee might range for a mile. But if you have these bees in your yard, they're truly your bees. They're in your yard. So it's important to think, like, what flowers do I need to give these bees? What flowers do I have for them? And look around your yard and think, if I were a bee, what would I eat? The way you know it's a megachelidae, mason bees aren't the only one, is they're going to carry the pollen on their belly. They don't carry it on their legs. If you see a bee flying by with a yellow ventral surface on the abdomen, that's in the megachelidae family. And there are all kinds of colors of bees. This is a blue mason bee. Here's another megachelidae that actually flies in the summer. They're going to fly. I only see these in my yard when it's about 70 degrees. Although there could be some spring flying leafcutter bees. We call them leafcutter bees because they come to like roses and other things with soft leaves, and they cut out a little shape, if you've ever seen that in your yard, and they carry it back to their nest, and they create a little cigar-shaped tube, and they lay their eggs inside of that. For whatever reason, they line their nest with flower petals and little pieces of leaves. And the nest looks just like a mason bee. They are a cavity nester, just like a mason bee, but they're using not mud to create little walls between the chambers, but they're using leaves. When I've taken these apart, they smell like perfume. It's really beautiful. And so if you see these little C shapes in your yard, you might not see the bee, but it's a leafcutter bee. They're named megachelidae because they have really big mandibles, because their mandibles are doing work, moving pebbles, moving mud, and moving leaves and cutting leaves. So to recognize them when you look at their face, their mouth parts, their mandibles are really large compared to another bee. Sweat bees. Who has ever had a tiny little bee land on their arm and run up and down? And then you get scared and you're like, aha, it's going to bite me. They're so tiny, their stinger probably can't get through your skin. They're really little. They tend to be in the summer, and they really are coming to lick the salt off of you. You know, like a butterfly will land on bird poop on the beach, and they're doing the same thing. They're getting the salts to build their eggs, most likely. They're a highly diverse group. Many are beautifully metallic, bright green, red and purple. I've never seen a purple bee, but I'm sure somewhere in North America there must be one, probably in the desert. They are also ground nesting. This is kind of what it looks like. And they are attracted to the salt in your sweat, and they're tiny and gentle and interesting. And you know, I was out in July in our gravel pit doing some geology stuff, and this one just landed on my hand, and I just watched it, and then it flew away. It got what it needed, and so you have to consider, like, maybe we could share some salt with this animal. Maybe it'd be okay. Maybe take a picture. That's a green one. Oh, yeah, they got their pollen on their legs and on their belly and everywhere imaginable. They're very messy, which is great for us. But there it goes down into the ground. And bright green animal, not necessarily a fly. Squash bee. Their flight time is when the squash bloom. They are a specialist pollinator. They only use nectar and pollen from the plants in the Cucurbita family, so squashes, cucumbers, gourds, and things like that. That is it. Why? Why would a native bee only use squashes and cucumbers? Go ahead.
Squashes are native to America.
100%. Squashes are a New World crop domesticated by indigenous people. So are tomatoes, so are blueberries, so are cranberries, avocados. You know, there's so many foods that were domesticated by Native Americans that are gifts to the world. And those foods, cranberries, thinking of others. Corn, yeah, but corn is a grass, so it's wind pollinated. Yes, definitely corn is a gift of the Native Americans. Native bees are better pollinators because they co-evolve. Strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, all native to North America. So this little fuzzy one, about the size of a honeybee, but fuzzier, slightly different color, not as stripy, not as brown, lives its entire life in, on, and around squash plants. So there's the nest. Do you see the squash? That's the nest. It's a ground nester. If you have your squash plant and you have about another pencil-sized, completely round hole, you know there's a lady squash bee down here. Where does the boy wait for her? He waits inside the flower. If you go out at 4 in the morning and squeeze your squash blossom flowers, he might be in there and you might be able to feel him buzzing. So he waits in the flower. She comes in the morning, and then the bee business happens of reproduction, and so she can lay eggs down in her nest. But if you're doing deep tilling in your squash areas, you might be killing off your squash bees, right? Unless you have a set-aside area in your garden. Bumblebees, they are our most important and hardest working garden pollinator because they fly from April through October. They are a large, strong, intelligent bee. They fly in very cool temperatures because of the body size and their ability to shiver to warm themselves up. The way they overwinter is a queen, a mated queen holding all the sperm that she needs to reproduce for that year and lay eggs for that year. She overwinters in the soil. She emerges when the soils are about 55 degrees. She does a low bumbling flight looking for a place to build a nest. She's larger than the other bumblebees, and you'll see them in June, you're like, boy, that's a big bumblebee, and it's a queen. When she finds a good place, an empty rodent burrow, actually, we don't know a lot about bumblebee nesting behavior, but I always hear an abandoned rodent burrow, okay. So she finds that, and she begins to gather nectar. She makes little honey pots. She lays eggs, and she incubates them like a chicken in cold weather. And then these eggs turn into her daughters. When she fertilizes the egg, it becomes a girl. When she holds back the sperm and does not fertilize the egg, it becomes a boy, so she can choose. So in the beginning, she makes all girls, and they build up a colony of about 25 to 1,000 workers. The queen stays in the nest. She only lays eggs. At the end of the summer, she starts to make boys. And new queens start to emerge. She dies. She has one summer of flight, and her daughter queens go on to mate with the boys. In September, the boys all die at the first frost. Only the queens overwinter, the mated queens. Yep, down in the soil, somewhere, probably in a natural area, in a messy area of your yard. They are generalists, and they can pollinate just about anything, from tomatoes to blueberries. That's maybe what a nest looks like. That's a queen pollinating a tomato. You say I have until 2:30, right? Habitat considerations. They need water to drink that they can land on. They can't land on open water. They need to land on something solid, because to take off, they have to push their wings down, and they can't do that on water. So a water source is really good where they can land on something solid and drink. Organic gardening is incredibly important in the urban and suburban landscape, because ideally we would be an oasis that is pesticide-free. When you get out into crop growing country, there's a tremendous amount of insecticides being used, and they don't always stay on site. Some are water soluble, some accumulate in the soil. So our home gardens and our neighbors' home gardens our town could be a bee sanctuary, a pesticide-free, safe place for them to raise their young, and I think that'd be a really proud thing if we could do that. Flower diversity. Crop set is related to bee diversity more than it's related to bee abundance. So the more diverse floral resources you can provide throughout the year, the more kinds of bees you will have, and the better your garden will produce for you. And wildflowers. Just a note about flower diversity. When you go to the garden center, it's not every flower is good for a bee. These double flowers have no pollen in them because the pollen-producing structures get transformed into extra petals, which look fancy for us, but they're not useful for a bee. You want things that are neonicotinoid-free because those are systemic pesticides expressed in every part of the plant, including the pollen. And so the mother is going to take an insecticide back and feed her young contaminated pollen, and that's not really good. So always look for something that is not neonicotinoid. They can apply it at any point, and even on the seed, and that's still going to be expressed in the pollen.
You mean on the commercial flowers?
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know if there's a labeling law, but you really want to know that. Were these plants grown with neonicotinoids? Because my understanding is at any point in that greenhouse process, if it's treated with neonicotinoids, it's going to have it in the pollen that the bee is harvesting. So you really do not want a plant that is protected from unwanted pests by neonicotinoids, because insecticides they don't discriminate. They kill bees, they kill aphids, whiteflies, and bees.
Do herbicides also present a problem for bees?
Do herbicides present a problem for bees? I don't know if they do directly, and I don't know if that's known, but we do know that bees are foraging in a complex chemical environment, and these are additive for them. So I don't know that, but it's possible. What it really is a problem for is eliminating floral resources. If people are going for the lawn that doesn't have any flowers in it, then that would be a problem for bees. All right, that's it for me. Really what I want to say here is this is what bees evolved with. This is a prairie. And these are wild plants. There's a succession of wild plants, and every week that you could go, you'll see a different kind of plant. There's probably in this particular prairie over 100 different flowering species that bloom throughout the year. This type of prairie used to be a third of Washtenaw County. This is a mesic prairie, so not this exact type, but prairie in general, and savanna, with abundant flowering plants. And prior to European settlement, when the Native Americans were burning, even our woodlands were more flower abundant. Our woodlands didn't have closed canopies. They had sunny glades and open canopies with woodland wildflowers throughout in spring, summer, and fall. And so the entire landscape was covered with high quality floral resources that the bees had co-evolved with for hundreds of thousands of years. Go ahead.
So we're going to create a pocket prairie in our city yard, and would you recommend paying attention to bloom times to make sure that we have a long range of bloom?
Oh, yeah.
Is it enough to just have diversity of types of plants like grasses, sedges, flowers?
Grasses and sedges may provide pollen, but they don't provide any nectar reward because they're wind pollinated. So they have no need to make nectar to attract a bee. They make pollen because they want to make seeds with their other sedge buddies. But what I do, what?
I was thinking more for
Sedges are great for your soil, and the flowers have always grown with grasses and sedges. I think it's an important part of any garden. But what I do is I make a chart, because I love spreadsheets, and do you know there's a spreadsheet championship? Look it up. There's a worldwide Excel championship, and I'm telling you, I am there for it. So what I do is a grid of April through October in 3 boxes, and I make sure I've got a flower blooming, 3 flowers blooming in April, 3 in May. 3, can you picture what I mean? It's like a 6x3 grid, and I fill it in. And then what bees want is to be efficient, so they don't want you to scatter these about your yard. They want it in a big grouping. That's the other thing. Put them all together. And if you start with one in each month, that's great. But go for each month because that's really what the bumblebees need. But bumblebees are a generalist. They forage on many different things. They can digest many different kinds of pollen. So if all they have is dandelions, it's not enough for viable young. They need diversity. So I'd go for 3. Does that make sense? As a target. And in yards in general, I think, if you just think about the whole ecosystem, I think a good target is about 70% native. Doesn't need to be 100%. We don't need to let the perfect be the enemy of progress. But about 70% is what gives I think a Carolina wren enough caterpillars to raise young. So that's another kind of metric that I keep in my head. Go to target, right? It's all evolution, right? Go ahead.
Sorry, lots of questions. What are the male bees doing that, not the ones from Apidae, but the other male bees? Because I know there's a lot of sexual dimorphism in honeybee colonies. What about the male bees in other species?
Well, so like I said, the bumblebee males come out in the fall only. All summer, you're only going to see females. And then all of the male bees in general are providing no care. They're providing no provisioning. They're only there to mate with the ladies. And then they die. Honeybees die on the mating flight, but the rest of them don't. They're just out there pollinating. They mate. They provide the sperm to the females. And, like if you're thinking about a mason bee, they're out flying now. They've come out of their nest and they're out flying. And the males come out first because the females are deeper in the nest. The mother bee chooses it that way because that's a more protected location. So in your nesting tube, if you have a bee house, the females are in the deepest and the males are in the most. So the males come out first. They hover in front of the nest. They wait for the females to come out. They leap on her right away. They get the business done, and then I think they just fly their life and forage and pollinate. But their job is done right away. I don't think so. I think only honeybees, and it's a little gruesome. Just like honeybees die when they sting you because their stinger is kind of attached to their internal organ and it sort of rips it out of their abdomen, as so happens with the male reproductive organ. Same, they die on the mating flight. But I don't think that happens with the other bees. Yeah, the penis gets ripped out. Sorry to say. It's true, though. Okay, I think you haven't asked a question yet. I'll go from this way to that way. Oh, it makes me really sad to say. Yeah, I will. I'll try to be quick. Bee houses are a death trap. They are terrible unless, there's one caveat, but you have to be very, very dedicated to make them work. You're creating a confined feeding operation. These bees would normally be very dispersed in the landscape. In a raspberry cane that's going to decompose into the soil within 3 years, but they will reuse the same nesting tube again and again and again if you let them. And they'll emerge, and they'll go right back into the same tube, and they'll kick out all the nesting material, and they'll re-nest in it. But what they don't kick out is the pollen mites. They don't kick out the chalk brood. They don't kick out the pests and parasites. And so if they reuse the same nesting tubes year after year, whether it be wood or paper, if you cannot change those nesting tubes or get those bees to nest in a new tube, they will die in there, and it'll look really cool from the outside. There'll be all these neat little caps, but then in the spring, nothing will come out because they're dead in there, because their bee got eaten by a pollen mite, or chalk brood made it so they couldn't develop. And I've taken apart those ones that are the bamboo reeds, and I had to literally get like a hammer and a knife to crack these open and snap them apart. They're not meant to be opened up. And in there was just a sad scene of destruction. 90% of them were dead. And so the thing is I wish I could figure out how to have a mason bee nesting house that I could put inside of an excluder box where the bee could go out in the spring but not come back in to the same nesting tubes, and right next to it have a fresh new nest. But what bee scientists do is you harvest your larvae in the fall when they go into diapause, So you got to make sure they don't use the same nests again, or they're gonna die in there. And then the pests build up, and whatever bee does live spreads them out to your landscape. And then the pests get more abundant in the landscape around you too, to affect other wild bees that aren't cavity nesters.
I've read about like soaking your bee house in bleach, and then is that
Well, yeah, if the
make it?
yeah, but you got to get the bees out of there. You have to empty it to do that. And that's the trick, because you'll get multiple species of bees using one bee house. Some are flying in April, some are flying in May, some are flying in June. And you can't tell, well, was this the old nest or the new nest? Is this it's just a mix of, it's a complicated mix. You have to find a way to let the bees out but not back into the same nest. And it turns out, I did it for a few years, it's really hard to do without harvesting all the larvae in October and putting them in your refrigerator for the winter. I think so. Plant yourself some raspberries and do a good job of pruning them in the fall. Harvest hollow plant stems. What kind of plant stems? Ones with thick walls that are about the diameter of a pencil on the inside. You don't need the really skinny plant stems. Those don't matter, like your teeny tiny thread-like aster stems. You need your chunky ones that a bee body can fit inside of. And they only need 6 inches.
Have you seen like the asparagus canes from last year? Would those make a good? It seems like they.
Try it out. But the key is you can't let them reuse the same old ones. Yeah, if you can help it. So always have fresh stuff at a minimum, fresh nesting material. Go ahead.
I was talking about the beginning, bee safety, because I potentially have an allergy. Last time I got stung, and my calf swelled up.
Oh yeah, that's concerning.
So I want to be friendly to the bees, but I need the bees to be friendly to me.
So if I were you, I probably wouldn't let a yellow jacket nest exist by my door. I would genuinely, if it's a safety thing, I would kill that nest. I would. If you have a yellow jacket nest in the ground, I've heard that you can pour honey into it and the skunks will come and eat it for you. So that's something to try. Let me know how that goes.
I just want to know how to have pollinators around, but not have them shy away with bumblebees and things.
So
Them being when I'm about.
no is the answer, unless you're going to pester them and squish them. Because I once had a bumblebee that couldn't fly. My kid found it. And I thought, I'm going to give this lady the best last day of her life. You know, she must have been at the end of her life. She couldn't fly anymore. So I put her on my finger, and I walked down to the park where it was this time of year. So there were a lot of dandelions, and I crawled through the park. I literally did this for an hour, carrying this bumblebee, fully sting capable, on the tip of my finger, from dandelion to dandelion. It's like Horton Hears a Who, right? And she would stand on my finger and put out her tongue and drink the nectar from the dandelion. And then when she pulled her tongue back in, I would say, well, maybe the nectar's gone. We'll go to the next one. And I let her drink as much nectar as she wanted. And she never stung me. And then I walked the tube for an hour. Like I'm carrying her. She's standing on my finger. It's her choice how to move her body, right? And then I walk back to my house, and she falls off of my finger onto the driveway. So I reach down and pick her up, and I squeeze her body, and that's when she stings me. And it hurt really bad. Bumblebee stings, they can sting you more than once. Only honeybees can sting you once, full disclosure. All the other bees can sting you more than once. But they only sting if you're a threat, because they're, by and large, they don't have something to defend. And they're vegetarian. They're actually really gentle animals. So keep your pollinator patch pretty far from where you're going to walk. But if you put native plants out there, you're going to attract native bees, and native bees are gentle. I literally have carpenter bees in my garage, and they've been nesting in there for 15 years, and I stand in this cloud of carpenter bees, and I let them look at me, and I look at them, and then they go off and do their thing. If you stand there, they're like, you're not a flower, and you're not another bee. I don't care about you. They will leave you alone. They really are gentle, and they want to just do their thing. But keep them away from your door and where you walk. Go ahead.
Can bees smell?
Bees can smell.
So they can smell cologne?
Well, maybe so, because I think that they're really looking to smell flowers. You know, that's what they're designed. I think the floral fragrances are there because bees can smell them. I want to do a little more research into that. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe I have heard that, and I'm being tentative because I haven't actually researched it myself. But I do think, yeah, if you wear cologne, that's a really good point. Don't wear cologne. Don't wear cologne if you're scared of bees. Yeah. Red is a good invisibility cloak. Bees don't really see red. Chickens do, but bees don't, I think, see red very well. But if you wear, the kind of colors that they like a lot of fuchsia and pink, and they might come and check you out to see if you're a flower. So wear crimson and don't wear cologne. Go ahead.
Hi, I live in an apartment that I'm going to be doing a container garden.
Yeah.
I do not own any land. Is there any way that I can contribute meaningfully to the wildlife preservation piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any nectar that you can provide gets that bee. It's like a rest stop. They can fuel up and rest on that flower to make it to the next woodland patch or the next person that does have land and is creating a native plant garden. Absolutely. Do a container with whatever annual you think provides the best nectar for bees, and keep it watered because nectar is made out of water.
There is probably like a listing of like native species that are good for bees that I can just look up online. Do you have any recommended sources for this?
I have so many, but they're not on the top of my head right now because it's not gardening and shopping season for me yet. but the annuals are fine. Like I think Sweet Alyssa might be really good for you. The gardeners in the room probably know better than me, but in a container, you kind of want to do an annual, but no neonicotinoids. Try to get it organically grown if you can, and ask. Raise awareness when you go to these garden centers. Be like, are these organically grown? Because we want our garden centers to be selling responsibly, right? So ask them. But I think in a pot you want a nice long. Most of our native plants are perennials and they have deep roots and they're not going to love a container. Go ahead.
In addition to kind of this, you could probably also set up a watering station.
Yeah.
Just with like a little dish, like a bird feeder kind of thing, but you put pebbles in it.
Mm-hmm.
That come above the surface of the water so they have a landing patch.
They love that. I like a fountain bubbler because I always get lazy about changing the water and it gets like greasy after a couple of days and that kind of bee water. But if you just get like one of those little waterfalls where there's a ledge on the edge of it that they can land on, I have just a little bubbler that the water goes up and then down again. They like that.
Just a quick question, because I happen to have these. Would water crystals work for a bee water? Because I used to breed
Mm-hmm.
insects, cockroaches.
Oh, wow.
Different variety.
I love that.
But I have a lot of leftover water crystals, and I'm like, hey, I can maybe make a bee water that way.
Try it out. I think this is a great experiment to do. I've seen like grate up an apple and put it in water and let them land and they'll get some, nutrition and water, but you'd have to change that every single day. I mean, if you're dedicated hummingbird feeder, it'd be no different. You really have to keep after these. I don't think you've asked a question yet. I'll come back. Go ahead.
So my hobby is mostly vegetable gardening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking especially about like the squash bees and stuff. Because they grow a lot of different kinds of squash, but they also have a lot of trouble with like squash beetles.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you balance the like having to take steps to prevent the pests eating all of your vegetables versus
Right, because squash beetles, they also nest in the ground. And if you don't till your soil, they build up. Is that why you're saying that? Yeah, yes, absolutely. And someone's saying, well, don't till because you need the squash bees. I mean, I think other bees can pollinate a squash, not just a squash bee, but they sure are neat. And you want to keep that, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of years old relationship. You want to keep it going. Right? And make space for that nature to happen. But I do think it really does lie in this and understanding that, hey, if you can support one squash bee, that's great. Do one squash bee. Do what you can. You don't have to do everything. Do what you can. So till your squash, but have a set-aside area that you don't. And in pumpkin farms, I think this study was done in pumpkin farms, when the farmers set aside 10% of their land to be fallow and grow up into flowers, they had better crop production. More pumpkins, not less. So 10% is a nice number to think. Take 10% of your garden and just make it flowers and no-till. And see what happens. See if it needs to be pretty sandy soil. The light, not the heavy wet stuff though, right? They want a lighter soil to drier and lighter. Anybody, go ahead.
I had bird seed in like 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
when it was cooler,
Mm-hmm.
bees coming around.
Oh, huh.
What do you think that is?
Oh, boy, I don't know.
It had a cherry smell, the aroma on the seed had it.
Oh, yeah, I bet that was it then.
That might have been it.
I think, yeah, they might have smelled it. Yeah, they were looking for some flowers. They smelled it. Yeah, go
Are
ahead.
there any ways to volunteer or learn more about insect conservation in Washtenaw County, either with your department or like at large, that anyone in this room could like volunteer and sign up to learn more about bee conservation and working in the field, well, with insects or bees in general?
I think what is happening right now that is so exciting is Bumblebee Watch is a national program of Xerxes Society, and Xerxes is assembling local regional programs under a national umbrella. They haven't brought Michigan in yet, but we have created Michigan Bumblebee Atlas at the state level through Michigan Natural Features Inventory. You can sign up. You can go and register for their online meetings where they train you. You get to learn all about bumblebee diversity. And I think if you're going to focus on conservation of one wild bee, I would say the bumblebee is your most important garden pollinator. It's your general, all-purpose, all-season. That's the big chunky one, the big, powerful, intelligent bee. It can push its way into a pea flower. It can nibble away at the bottom of a blueberry blossom. They're very intelligent animals, and they fly from April to October. So they really are so you can register for these. This is last year's recording. He really is talking he's an excellent bee biologist, and he's talking about why are bumblebees in so much trouble right now? What really happened to cause that? What are our rarest bumblebees that you can go out into the wildland and look for? How do you document these bees? And so it does focus on bumblebees, which is it's really like 2% of our wild bees are bumblebees, but there are 2% that really matters in the garden. So I would start here, and because it's a new program and it's a Michigan-based program, so that's where I would go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? I know I've kept you for longer, but
I mean, we all wanted to be here.
yeah. I love bees,
If we had to leave, we left.
Yeah, no, you're welcome to leave if you need to. I won't be offended, but honestly, the best thing you can do for bees is go out into your garden and get a cup of iced tea and just sit there and watch them.
Yeah.
Just be present. And I think that is, nature misses us and wants our attention back. And when you do, the beauty and the diversity, it is awesome. It's awe-inspiring. Like just the complexity of the world around us and the beauty. So just go out there and sit and watch a flower. And when you're still, even a 10-foot-long pollinator garden is a dance of life. Every single flower is a light. And the best two things you can add are willows and goldenrods. Willows and goldenrods, yeah. Goldenrods are particularly for like your bumblebee queens to really fuel up. They have to fatten up for their winter hibernation, just like a bear.
And a lot of other insects use the nest inside the stems.
Yep, and yes, and goldenrods are not an allergen because they're not a wind-pollinated plant. They don't cause allergies. Nope, they don't, because they're not it has to be something wind-pollinated to float through the air to cause allergies. And if the pollen isn't in the air, you're not getting an allergic reaction. Yeah, just learning about bees. Even if you can't garden for bees, learning about bees and contributing to community science knowledge is really important too. Anything else? Any other questions? Thank you. Yeah, thank you all.